Prince Charles tells me that companies are finally realising they are the key to fighting the existential threat of climate change. We spoke in an exclusive interview to mark the launch of his new Terra Carta. Now, as the Magna Carta promoted human rights back in 1215, the Terra Carta promotes nature's rights and outlines what the private sector can do to help in partnership and harmony. The Prince of Wales released the plan on Monday and said there's no time to lose.
We simply cannot maintain this course indefinitely. To build a productive and sustainable future, it is critical that we accelerate and mainstream sustainability into every aspect of our economy. To move forward, there must be a center of gravity to catalyze such a monumental effort and to mobilize the resources and incentives required.
And that is business. Because one of the Charter's goals is to funnel $10 billion into green causes by 2022. And several companies are backing the initiative. Bank of America, BlackRock, Unilever, BP, and you see the list. I spoke to the Prince of Wales, who joined me from Tetbury in England. He told me he hopes that Terra Carta will help rescue the world from the future.
Yes, there is a significance, I think, in it in terms of how the Magna Carta was something which inspired a belief in the fundamental rights and liberties of people. And it seemed to me critical now that we understand, as a result of what we've done to nature for so long, that nature herself has her own rights, and we have a responsibility to try to remember that. I mean, I've always felt sacred aspects in all this, which the more we desacralize nature, the worse it gets. So that is why it seems to me the Terra Carta is of such importance, because I hope it enshrines that understanding of why we must work with nature in harmony again, as we always should be doing.
The phrase you used in there was rescue the world. And I think that speaks to this idea of being out of disharmony and the way it fits into your sustainable markets initiative that you announced at Davos last year. But it comes back to this concept of rescue the world.
Yes, I mean, it seems to me that only now, and I've been, I'm afraid, at this for rather a long time, certainly 40 years or a little bit more. And it's been what can only be described as an uphill battle to try and persuade people that you can't go on doing the things we've been doing ad infinitum without having a terrible price to pay. And this has been the greatest difficulty. I've always rather subscribed to the catastrophe theory, because unfortunately, as human beings, we tend to leave everything until it's virtually too late, and you're just about to fall over the edge of the cliff. So it's only literally in the last 18 months or so that I think that the mood has changed, and people have become much more concerned suddenly about the situation we face, both from a global warming climate change perspective and, of course, the loss of biodiversity. Because with both these threats and huge challenges, we are faced with an existential situation, a threat. And now, at last, suddenly, the financial services sector, capital markets sector, the banks and others are all suddenly taking a real interest in this, driven, of course, a lot of them by the change in outlook from many investors and many shareholders who are putting more and more pressure on the companies, banks and financial sector. Also, there are so many young people I know who are now employees in many of the companies around the world who are also pushing as hard as they can for action to be taken to rescue the situation, to restore biodiversity before it's too late, and also to try to decarbonize our economy as fast as possible.
The difference this time seems to be the call and involvement of business. Now, business is not altruistic in an abstract sense. And you say today about industry and finance and business as only they are able to mobilize the innovation, scale and resources required to transform our global economy. Is that the difference? That now the finance industry, the banks, business recognizes the significance?
Yes. I mean, suddenly they have started in a much bigger way to recognize this. And if I may say so, I've been enormously assisted in what we've been trying to do all this year by Brian Moynihan, the chairman and CEO of the Bank of America, who's my co-chairman of the Sustainable Markets Initiative. And his role has been quite of dramatic importance, I think, in terms of encouraging other banks. We now have a task force, financial services task force, with some very high-powered banks and other groups, also asset managers, who are joining in this effort. Because I've always believed that the private sector has really the key to the solutions to all this. But at the same time, it needs to be a private-public partnership with civil society. And for so many years I've tried, whether it was my rainforest project or the International Sustainability Unit I set up to try and drive forward greater awareness of what is required. It's now suddenly that there is greater awareness of what is required. But at the same time, there are still, out of the 40,000 listed companies around the world, there are still very few who have a proper, carbon transition, climate action transition plan in place. So there's still a huge mountain to climb, and a lot more people to convince. And this is why I was so pleased that we've been able to put together a natural capital investment alliance of other investors in order to try and bring forward even more finance and to catalyze a greater investment in these important areas.
The United States is said to rejoin the Paris Accord under the new administration that will take office next week. As somebody, I mean, you were there at the start of Paris. You gave one of the keynote addresses at the start. Do you welcome this development?
Yes. I mean, it was obviously very sad that the United States hasn't been able to play as much of a part as it was, because, of course, many people around the world have always looked to the United States for leadership as one of the greatest economies in the world. It's absolutely critical to have the United States involved and playing a key and essential part. So from that point of view, the fact that it's poised to rejoin, we hope, the Paris Agreement, will make an enormous difference, I think, and help to leverage even further support around the world. So yes, and I've been very lucky in the number of American companies, and as I say, banks and investors, asset managers, who are all now becoming much more enthusiastic about joining in and forming a big global alliance. We're trying to build alliances and coalitions of the willing in all the different sectors of the economy. And these task forces, I've encouraged them to try and find a way to tackle as many of these issues around decarbonization and the restoration of biodiversity, and all linked to improving people's lives and livelihoods for the future.